Recently, we did a live stream where we took a look at a new NAS operating system called Fygo OS. Now, for transparency, the folks at Fygo reached out to me and brought their NAS operating system to my attention. They also sent me a lifetime license for the operating system, but they didn't and don't get any say over that live stream or this video. Now, one other thing to mention here is that the OS is still fairly early in development when you compare it to other NAS solutions out there like Synology or TerraMaster's operating systems. So that's something to keep in mind as we go through this today. Now, that said, you will likely see influence from those other systems in Fygo, but the reality is that they all kind of look very similar these days. But I believe that that has to do with these different companies wanting a lower barrier to entry, so they all kind of work and look the same, I believe, for that reason. Now, during the live stream, we started off by installing Fygo following the official documentation, and that involved using Rufus to flash the USB installation media. So we did that. We booted the machine and started the install process, but repeatedly got stuck on loading initial RAM disk. So after a few times of doing that, I recreated the bootable USB media using Balena Etcher, and we actually finally got into the installation process, and everything went very smoothly that time. And I was actually surprised that the operating system only wanted 64 gigs of space to run, and that you can use the rest of your boot drive for other things like storage or even SSD caching, like I eventually did later on. Once the install was done, we created a couple of different storage volumes, and one was a 1 terabyte NVMe storage pool, and the other was an 8 terabyte hard drive storage pool. And the process was pretty straightforward. First, you select the file system that you want to use, and at the time of recording, the options are ext4, btrfs, and ZFS. Then you select your storage devices and the RAID solution that you want to use for your setup. Then give the volume a name and click go. Overall, the basic setup was actually pretty straightforward, which I appreciated. And from there, we actually just kind of dug into the operating system and poked around and looked at different aspects of Fygo OS. And probably, if I'm honest, spent a little bit too much time digging through and exploring the Photos app. But rather than rehashing that, I thought what we could actually do here is go off script just a little bit and dig through Fygo OS for ourselves in this video so that I can show you how this currently works and what you can expect when you install it for yourself. So this is my instance of Fygo OS as I left it after completing the live stream here recently. Basically, this looked almost exactly like this when we logged in, with a couple of exceptions that I want to touch on real quick. As I mentioned earlier, we did install the Photos app. I like to always install the Photos app just to dig around and see how a different company's photo app actually works. I've done this on Synology that I actually use full-time to back up my phone, my wife's phone. We use Synology Photos for that. TerraMaster has something similar, and as does Fygo OS, and I wanted to check that out. Docker was already installed and ready to go. That was already there, so I love that as well. But if we come over here to the right-hand side of the screen, we can see that there's a checklist here that says, welcome to Fygo OS. And we can see, again, like I said, it's kind of a checklist of sorts of things to do. We can see that we've created our volumes, we've installed Fygo OS. There's an install Fygo TV, which is their media server solution. We did not cover that on the live stream, and we're not going to cover it here because, unfortunately, the moderators on YouTube very often mistake this for trying to promote things like piracy, and I don't want them to get confused by installing just a local media app on my NAS solution. So we're going to forego that. Just know that Fygo TV is their media server app. Below that, we can enable Fygo Connect, which is an easy way to remotely access your NAS solution, even if you're away from home, and there's a multitude of ways that we can do that. And then there's the option to come down here and set up a recovery or a security email if we needed to do things like get a reset link in case you forget your password or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize that just so that it's out of our way and it's not taking up part of our screen space here. Again, we've got files, we've got Docker. Again, Docker was already pre-installed and configured. Photos we installed during the live stream. There's a backup solution. We've got system settings, resource manager. There's an app store, though it is limited. We will come back to that in a moment. We can take a look at logs. We can look at downloads. And of course, there's a trash or a recycle bin, as you would expect in any good NAS solution. If we come up to the top left, there's desktop. So if you've got a bunch of stuff open, you can just click on desktop and minimize all of that. Let's actually close these. I just wanted to demonstrate that real quick. And then, of course, there's all apps. So this is basically everything that we have installed, which again is basically everything we saw on our desktop. And then below that is that welcome to Fygo OS that we cannot minimize from there. We actually have to come back over to here. Now, so with that said, let's go ahead and come down here to the bottom. We've got file tasks, we've got notifications, we've got my account, and we've got settings. And I believe there's a couple. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit different. For system settings, shutdown, restart, about, and help center. I believe if we go to about, it is not there. I was hoping that there would be a place right here where we could actually see if there was an update available to us. Apparently it is not here. So that's my mistake. I would figure there would be a version of that here though. So maybe they'll add that later. If we come up to files, again, here we can see, unfortunately, we can't shrink this, which is kind of unfortunate. We can make it bigger. Unfortunately, this is as small as we can make it. So let's drag this out just a little bit here. So maybe we can see the whole thing. So by default, any of the folders that you create in My Files or under Team folders will automatically be available on your network. So what I mean by that is if I come over to here and I do this, give this a second, it'll probably ask me to log in, though it may take a moment. There we go. Here is everything. Again, we can cross-reference this. Not shared photos, speed test, test share. All of those are right here. And then there's also a team, my team folder. If we open up team folder, hey, there is my team folder. Again, by default, any of the folders that you create in here are going to be shared on your network. However, you can change that if you want to by going into the system settings, file services. Here we go. I'm pretty sure it's in here, which would make sense, right? So SMB, enable SMB service to allow devices to easily share and access files within the LAN. Set visible folder scope. My files and shared with me, all allowed. Team folder, all allowed. You would probably want to come in here and change this so that you can either have all restricted so that no folders are accessible on the network, or what's most likely going to make the most sense is go to custom folders and say maybe photos and test share, again, just for the sake of testing here. We'll go ahead and click on confirm there. For team folders, maybe team folders is fine for everything to be shared across the team for that sort of thing. So maybe this one is fine. We can leave that as it is. We can come back over to here and then we can refresh. I'll give this a second to reload those permissions. And then we should only see just a couple of folders here versus I think the 5 that were there a moment ago. So I will say this has been a little bit slow in my experience. There we go. Now we're only saying the photos, test share, and the team folder. So what I did want to mention is that I have noticed a little bit of slowness in my setup. I've been talking to the folks at Fygo OS. I sent them my logs. They didn't actually notice anything that was out of the ordinary. So it could be my hardware. I'm running this on the Beelink ME Pro with the N95 processor in it. They are sending me an N150 processor to check this out as well. But they weren't able to reproduce any of the slowness that I've seen. So please don't take the slowness that you may see in this demonstration as something that you would expect from your own. Again, after having talked to the folks at Fygo OS, this seems to be a bit of an anomaly. So I just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention. So coming back to our desktop here, we're still in the file services area of our system settings, and we can see that we're on the SMB folder here, sorry, the SMB settings here rather. There's also WebDAV, where again, you can adjust the individual settings for these different sections as you need to for your needs. There's also FTP, where you can enable that by going into settings and enabling FTP right over here. Again, the slowness, there we go. And we could set up the visible folder scope for that as well if we needed to. There's NFS and there's DLNA if you want to enable those things or set restrictions on any of those different things depending on what your setup happens to be needed or what you happen to need for your setup. So again, that is file services. So I'm going to go ahead. We'll come back over to here just real quick. There's also a duplicate file setting where you can ask every time skip, keep, or upload and overwrite. So you've got some options there on how you want to handle duplicate files. Same thing with copying and moving files. If there's any duplicates, you can set what the default settings are for that. We've got external storage that would be visible to all users, only administrators, or visible and ejectable by all users. Probably not a great idea to do that. So I would probably leave this on only administrators can see and eject, unless you really, really trust the other people on your network. But there's also link sharing if you wanted to go that route. You can decide who can share links. By default, you would only be able to share this locally on your local IP address. But if you were to set up remote access, you could also do it that way as well. And you can decide who gets link sharing privileges. And then with remote mount, you can upload file cache location preferences to volume 1 or volume 2 or however many volumes you have in your system. So just wanted to bring this file settings page to your attention there. Let's go ahead and close this. Let's come back over to here to the system settings. We've got device information. There's some really good information here as far as things like the device name, the device ID, the system version. I'm still on the trial, though I do have a license for this, as I mentioned. We can check for updates. We can see the system time and how long it's been up. We've got a Fygo account we can log in. Fygo Connect is disabled currently. We can see our system partition. This is for the operating system, not our entire system storage. Our volume, this should actually be RAM and total system storage available for our hard drives. Hardware information, again, that's the N95 that I mentioned earlier with 4 cores and 4 threads. And again, with 12 gigs of RAM, apparently running at 6400 megahertz, which honestly, I was surprised to see that it was running that quickly. Again, also using LPDDR5, which means it's soldered. And it's got the Intel UHD integrated graphics that I believe with something like a virtual machine or something like that, we could actually pass that through. We can also use that in the Photos app. And this device actually has 3 different network interfaces. It's got 2 LAN devices and a wireless device. If we wanted to use any combination of those, we've got that available to us right there. Next, if we look at user management, of course, we've got a couple of different users here. This is my admin account. I also did a test I also created a test account to do just exactly that, some testing during the live stream. You can create additional users and decide are they a standard user or an admin, and then you can enter their information and have them join groups, that sort of thing, depending on, again, what your network or your NAS solution needs happen to be. For storage, again, we've got a couple of different volumes. Again, we've got a 1 terabyte NVMe storage pool, as well as an 8 terabyte roughly SATA hard drive storage pool. And then earlier I'd also mentioned that the operating system only requires 64 gigs of storage. So I was able to use part of that additional, or that hard drive, that operating system hard drive as SSD cache acceleration. I was able to do that by going to SSD cache acceleration here. And again, I just selected 250 gigs from the boot drive to be my SSD cache acceleration. And again, I've still got another additional 150 gigs that I can use for other things if I wanted to go that route. Next, we've got hard drives where we can see all of our individual hard drives in here. Again, that 500 gig is my boot drive, a couple of NVMEs, a couple of hard drives, pretty straightforward there. Again, network information here, we can do link aggregation. We can see real-time speed of what's happening on the device with regard to networking, IP addresses, DNS, all of the stuff you would expect to see here. Again, remote access, I don't have this set up, and will probably wait until I get my other device configured before I do any kind of Fygo Connect or remote access, just because I want to make sure that I've got it set up properly on the best possible hardware before I start doing remote access types of things. We can do SSH server. By default, it is turned off. Also, by default, it is set to port 22. I would have liked to have seen the default port be something else for the sake of security purposes. So I changed it to 2223, but again, I don't have it turned on. For security, we can change our access ports. By default, it's on 5666 and 5667 for HTTP and HTTPS respectively. We've got account security where we can enable two-factor authentication. We've got protection where we can ban suspicious IPs. We can enable a firewall with some predefined inbound and outbound rules, though I'd probably want to change some of these ports. And then certificates for remote access and that sort of thing. You can do that as well, or add your own certificates if you need to do that. Our next page over here is going to be file services. Again, we kind of looked at this a moment ago, where we've got SMB, WebDAV, FTP, NFS, DLNA, and with all of these, we can set visible folder scopes and those sorts of things. And of course, each one will also tell us how to connect to each of these different services, which I actually really like. A lot of NAS operating systems that I've seen don't actually bother to tell you how to connect each service, and I love that they were like, hey, here's how if you don't know. I actually really appreciate that. Next, we've got license. I don't have any licenses in here. Actually, I've got one. In fact, it should show a trial license, but maybe that is expired. It shouldn't have. Thought I had 30 days. But anyway, oh, there it is. It again, just a little slowness here and there every once in a while. So I do have a trial license in here that's still good for another 3 weeks or so. And again, if you needed to, or if you actually wanted to buy a license, which we'll talk about in a little bit, this is where you would see all of your licenses, which ones are active, which ones are inactive, and be able to manage your licenses on your setup. For notifications, you can enable an email service. You can select a provider here, which I really like, where you could select Gmail, click authorize, and then have the system use your Gmail account to send you notifications. I super appreciate that. There's also Outlook with the same process, and then there's custom where you can go in and fill in all of that custom information rather than using Outlook or Gmail. I love this solution for setting up email services in Fygo OS. Really like that. For hardware and power, we can enable UPS support with this. I believe it does require USB, which is where that came from a moment ago. You can enable that. Type USB is the only current type for this right now. So if you've got a UPS that you wanted to plug into this, you absolutely could do that by going through this process. Next, we've got update and restore. I believe there actually is an update. I don't want to do that right now, just because I'm in the middle of telling you about the things that I know, and I don't want to then have an update screw me up there a little bit. But I can just click the blue update now button, and it'll go through that update process, super like that. Again, you can back up your system configuration so that if you need to, you can restore it very easily by doing an export and then an import. And then there's a full system reset if you needed to go that route. And it kind of covers everything that will go through the reset there, as well as the backup. It talks about everything that it will back up there as well. You can also change the time zone and the date and time. And by default, this is wrong, but it's close enough for who it's for. We can also switch the language to one of just a couple of different options here. And of course, I chose English for my setup. So if we come back to our desktop, we've already looked through files here. So let's click on Docker, and here we can see that Docker is up and running. The Docker service can be started and stopped by checking the little box here. We can also have it auto start yes or no by checking the box below that. We can also set our storage location. I set this to my 8 terabyte setup just because I wanted to have the most available storage for my Docker stuff for whatever I happen to install here. Next over here, we've got containers. Right now, I've just got speed test enabled here, but I can click that like so, and that's fine. I don't necessarily need it to be HTTPS, but because I'm on HTTPS over here, it automatically kicked me over to HTTPS over here. So that's why we are into that little discrepancy there. This is just a speed test between the computer I'm on right now and the NAS back there. So this is only going to get about a 1 gig connection as it does its thing. If it does its thing, there it goes. And I say it's worked fine in the past. It's just, again, being a little bit slow, but again, about a 1 gig connection here as we would expect. There you go. That's a Docker container working. We can close this. We can add a container if we want to. We can select, well, we don't have anything to select there other than we've already downloaded, but we can go to compose. We can add a project, and we can give it a name, give it a path. We can say where we want to share it. We can create new folders if we want to do that. we can either upload a Docker compose.yml file, or we can create one right here in our dashboard, which I super appreciate. We could, if we wanted to, probably use this to install something like Portainer or Dockhand, and then from there go in and use a different platform to actually manage our Docker containers, which is something I would probably do if I were going to move over to Fygo OS. Next, we've got local images. Again, we can add images up here. We can add from a URL, which appears to be the only way to presently add an image. There's also an image registry where we can scroll through here if we wanted to, and we could, just click download, select the tag that we want, and then we would have that in our local images as soon as it finishes downloading. So very, very straightforward as far as downloading images is concerned. We've also got networks here, your standard Docker networks, which would be none, host, and bridge. Again, these are very, very standard networks, but if we needed to, we could also create a Docker network here with the name, a subnet, a gateway, an IP range, those sorts of things we can manually create very, very easily. So love that the Docker solution here is actually pretty straightforward. So once again, coming back to our desktop here, we've got things like backup that we can open this up, and we can set up a backup Fygo where you can back up a remote server, external device, or another directory on your Fygo OS system. Or you can set up a backup remote storage where the destination is Fygo. Those will be entire videos all to themselves, so we're not going to get into that, but just know that there is a backup solution built into Fygo OS. We've already looked at system settings. We did that earlier in this video. The resource manager here, again, we'll give this just a second to load. There we go. And again, we're just going to see kind of more of what we saw earlier as far as uptime, temperature, usage for both CPU. We've got memory usage, network usage, GPU usage. Again, we've just got the iGPU, so this probably won't show up unless you've got an actual dedicated GPU device. Hard drive, nothing is being read or written, really. 8 kilobytes there. All of our device information here as far as storage, temperature, busy, read and write, and then how it's being used, which I love. Again, more information about the CPU, the memory, the network, the GPU, all of that is there. And of course, we also got a process manager that we can take a look at and see what different processes are using as far as CPU, memory, disk read, that sort of stuff that you would expect to see in these resource managed areas. There's an app store. Again, I mentioned that there was an app store earlier in the video, and I will say that it is fairly minimal at this point, but again, this is fairly early in development. So just know that as more adoption takes place and more time has gone by, the app store should get filled out with more applications that we can use. But there are some good ones in here. There's a Git instance, there's MB, there's Jellyfin. There's an NVIDIA driver, which I love to see that. There's also an AMD, the ROCm app that you can install on here. There's SyncThing, Radar, and Sonar in here. And of course, then you can break these down by individual categories. Again, there's not much in here, but just know that more apps are hopefully on their way very, very soon. Again, we've got logs where we can see most everything that has happened over the last however long. Downloads, I don't have anything in my downloads. Even if this loads slowly, there's nothing there. And of course, trash. Like I said, we would expect to have a trash just because it's a NAS and you don't want to permanently delete something until you've permanently deleted it from the trash. So with that said, let's actually jump over to the Photos app, which is the one I've got the most experience with at this point, because it's the one I've spent the most time with. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on Photos here. And here we can see that we can search and filter, which is great. We would expect to be able to do that. Now, by default, AI search is turned on. Like I said, by default, it is just on. Now, I ran into some issues here where it would recognize some things and not other things. Like if I type in the word bike, I'll give this a second. It's going to load the AI model because it's been unloaded, because it's been sitting for the last few days since we did our live stream. It took it a second, but hey, look, it found several pictures of bikes. In fact, it even found like the handlebars that are just tucked away in this corner. It did a really good job of that. However, that said, like I've got a picture of a car here and I've got a picture of a car here. But if I type in the word car, it's going to search for a second and it's not going to find anything. We can try vehicle. Again, it's not going to find anything. So there's just some weird things as far as the AI search is concerned. Some of it works really, really well, and some of it still needs to be tweaked a little bit. Also, so let's close this out. And like if I open this up and I come up here to information, one of the things that we can hopefully see once it loads in is that it should have me and my wife recognized, so that if I click on my picture or my little icon again when it pops up, it should show other pictures of me that are in the system, right? So if I click this, hey, look, other pictures of me. However, if I come back over here, even if I turn AI search off and type in David, doesn't find anything. Again, if I turn on AI search, it doesn't find anything. So the search is still a little bit weird as far as that is concerned and what it will and won't find. But, you know, everything loads really nicely. I'm super happy with how quickly everything loads in. It's a really, really pleasant system. I can hit exit on my keyboard. You know, we can create folders, we can have favorites, recently added photos, albums, shared people, places. All of that is over here as well. And I think that they've done a pretty good job with this. Again, I've just run into a few different issues with how the search function works. And of course, as we're seeing here, a little bit of slowness on some of these page loads. Now, the other thing to make note of here is the licensing of the operating system. Now, the free license will give you a very basic NAS solution with some limitations on both storage devices and users. Now, that said, you get a 30-day free trial of the setup, or the full setup rather, to get an idea of what you might need for your particular use case. And from there, you can select to pay about $50 per year or get a lifetime license for about $200, which honestly, I don't feel is too out of line for what you're getting. But again, this is a young NAS solution, so we have to hope that the development continues for the next several years at a bare minimum. So what are my thoughts on Fygo OS? Well, it's still pretty early in the development cycle, and because of that, it isn't as polished or as consistent as other systems that we've looked at over the years, and there are still a few hiccups that we've seen that still need to be addressed. But they all have to start somewhere, and I feel like that with time, Fygo really could grow into be something pretty great. Overall, I really like Fygo despite a few of the shortcomings that we've seen in this video, and I really hope the development team keeps up the great work. But I want to know what you guys think about Fygo. What do you like? What do you not like? And what features would you like to see them add to the system? Let me know in the comment section below, and I'm sure that they will be happy to read them. And maybe the feature that you request will actually show up in a future release. But I think with that said, I'm going to wrap this up. I want to thank you guys for spending a few minutes of your day with me here today, and I'll talk to you in the next video.